I knew something was wrong the moment he called the finance archive room a dead zone for dinosaurs. That's what he said, right in front of me, while flipping through our internal controls binder like it was a CVS receipt. 21 years I'd spent at that company, building layer after layer of safeguards, logic checks, triple verification systems that made sure no one, no matter how slick, could fudge the numbers without leaving a trail. And here comes Ethan Manning, CFO wunderkind from Palo Alto, walking in with his perfectly distressed jeans and that smug little half-smile, like the laws of finance didn't apply to him. They said you were the keeper of the scrolls, he joked the first day we met, pointing at my 8-inch binder labeled Critical Transitions and Risk Transfer. I smiled, tightly, the kind of smile you give a man who thinks Excel macros are optional and SEC filings are just corporate fan fiction. I'd seen his type before. I just hadn't seen one get handed the keys to our financial castle. But the board loved him, said we needed disruption, said I'd done beautifully, but the future was agile, reactive, digital first. So I started packing, quietly. I wasn't angry, not yet. Truth is, I'd been planning to retire for 6 months. I had my pension lined up, my house paid off, and a little place in Vermont I'd been fixing up with my sister on weekends. But still, watching him tear through protocols I wrote with my own hand, calling them legacy friction points, it felt like walking past a burning church no one else could see. By the way, if you're the kind of person who actually reads the fine print, or likes stories where the quiet one turns out to hold all the power, take a second to like the video and subscribe. 97% of you forget, but it genuinely helps the team bring more of these to life. All right, back to the mess. It was during the 3rd week of Ethan's reign that he brought me a draft, some new leadership transition document he was streamlining ahead of the quarterly. Said legal had glanced at it, but he wanted me to sprinkle some of my magic on it before it went final. I read it, twice. Then I poured myself a coffee and asked if he had a few minutes to walk through the amendment language regarding voting rights and fiduciary continuity during executive turnover. He laughed. The fine print's irrelevant, he said. This is all CYA nonsense for a board that's never going to read past the bullet points. Then he signed it, right there in front of me. Didn't even ask if I had edits. Didn't notice I'd already initialed the revision in red, 1 paragraph, buried neatly in the section he didn't bother to check. I didn't smile. I just nodded, closed the folder, walked back to my office and opened a secure line to legal. Not to start trouble, just to confirm the language was enforceable and properly logged. Then I copied the board secretary, just for transparency, just in case. After that, I scheduled my retirement for the end of the quarter and went back to work like none of it mattered. When my last day came, I wore the same navy pantsuit I'd worn on my first day, back when the company only had 60 employees and we used faxes to send payroll. I packed my things in a banker's box. No one threw a party. No one made a speech. Ethan handed me a Starbucks gift card and said, "Don't be a stranger." I nodded, shook his hand, and left behind a sealed envelope on my desk labeled Transition Continuity Final Amendment with a single sticky note. Per your request, signed copy enclosed. I got in my car, drove home, and didn't look back. Not then, anyway. 2 weeks after I left, I got a message from Anna in accounts payable. It was a screenshot of an email Ethan had blasted out to the entire department with the subject line, New era, new rules. The body was even worse. He called our existing multi-tier sign-off protocols paralysis by bureaucracy and said from now on, vendor payments under $250K could be green-lit at CFO discretion. No audit trail, no cross-verification, just vibes and a digital signature. I stared at the screen for a good 10 minutes, rereading the words like they were in a different language. It wasn't just risky. It was reckless. The same man who mocked our documentation now had sole discretion over high six-figure payouts, and he was treating the whole system like his college startup's Venmo account. And it wasn't just the payments. He started blowing holes through every safeguard we'd built. Expense policy? Too rigid? Conflict of interest disclosures? Slows down innovation? Deferred revenue recognition checks? Old world thinking. He even went so far as to ask legal if we could sunset the compliance training requirement for new execs. Said it killed onboarding morale. The worst part wasn't that he was changing things. That's his job, technically. It was the way he laughed about it. Like the company was some outdated gadget he'd been hired to jailbreak. He told a VP in finance during a meeting, "We're not here to play accountant. We're here to win." Win what, Ethan? A Pulitzer for creative asset mismanagement? But I said nothing. Not publicly. Not to the board. I'd spent over 2 decades building that house, brick by brick, ledger by ledger, and now I was watching it get turned into a frat house. But I'd already left. I wasn't there to fight. I was there to watch. What Ethan didn't realize, what no one realized, was that buried in the executive agreement he fast-tracked during his second week was the exact amendment I offered to walk him through. The same one I tried, with all due politeness, to explain over coffee one morning. I've highlighted a few key areas, I'd said, particularly in the event of a temporary transfer of fiduciary control. The fine print's irrelevant, he cut me off, waving a hand like he was shooing a fly. I'm not worried about paperwork ghosts. We're building forward. He took the folder, didn't read a single sentence, signed at the bottom. I initialed my part, stapled the legal copy, and filed it, like I always did. That version, the final version, was the one sent to legal. It was the one copied to the board secretary. It was the one now living in the company archive under operational continuity, signatory amendments. He called it a ghost. He had no idea how right he was. A month in, he announced a new initiative, single point compliance, which in English meant gutting oversight and replacing it with whatever he felt like that day. He replaced my old team with consultants who came in wearing loafers, with no socks, and talked about real-time agility while ignoring 3 open reconciliation errors. I kept getting texts from the people who were still hanging on. They didn't want me to fix anything. They just wanted to vent. He just reversed the PO cutoff window. He denied the Q2 audit request. He told internal audit to chill. I'd respond with little thumbs up or eye emojis. Nothing traceable. Nothing actionable. But every message got saved. Every forwarded file. Every timestamp. Because I wasn't just watching, I was documenting. I wasn't building a case. I was preserving a story. And the ending? Well, he'd already signed that part himself. I didn't expect a send-off. Hell, I would have been uncomfortable with one. What I didn't expect was indifference so loud it felt like a slap. 21 years, and not even a damn balloon. I walked into the office early that morning with a black coffee, a navy coat, and a box I'd saved from the last time we ordered new printers. My nameplate was already gone from the door. Someone had peeled it off and left the faint square outline like a scar. I packed my drawer slowly. One mug from the Chicago trade show, 2 pens that never ran out of ink, a photo of my son from his college graduation. He's taller than me now. A plaque that said, "Diligence is silent." A gift from our old CFO, back when we still gave a damn about details. Ethan breezed by around 9:45, Bluetooth headset glued to his skull, sipping some neon green health drink like it was jet fuel for his ego. "Hey, retirement day, huh? Congrats. Don't be a stranger." Then he kept walking, didn't even pause to make eye contact. I stood there holding a stapler, my box half-packed, thinking about all the hours I stayed late to make sure vendor payments reconciled to the penny. About all the red flags I'd flagged, the off-books loans I prevented, the time I stopped an overpayment that would have cost us $2.7 million because someone fat-fingered a digit. Now all of that, buried under standing desks and Slack emojis. At 10:07 a.m., I printed one final document. I'd reviewed it a dozen times. Not because I was nervous, because I was thorough. It was a clean, unambiguous clause buried in a sea of legalese. In the event of significant internal disruption during executive leadership transition, voting authority and fiduciary access would temporarily revert to the most recently retired controller. Specifically named, specifically signed, specifically notarized. I slid it into a manila envelope, labeled it Operational Continuity, Final Amendment, sealed it, and walked it down to legal myself. Dropped it off with Tara at the front desk. "Need me to sign anything?" I asked, calm as a lake before a storm. "Nope," she said, scanning the barcode. "You're all good. Can you just CC the board secretary on the handoff?" She looked up, blinked, then nodded slowly. "Of course." "Thanks," I said, and turned. The weight didn't lift as I walked out. It settled, deeper. Not anger, not vengeance. Just something quiet and patient and precise. The kind of emotion you don't show your face to. The kind that sits in the passenger seat while you drive home, saying nothing, just tapping its fingers on the dash, waiting. I didn't go to Vermont that weekend like I planned. I stayed home, cleaned the fridge, made tea, checked the company's filings for Q1. There were already errors, footnotes gone, disclaimers pulled, no cross-verification signatures, no independent oversight. The house I built wasn't burning yet, but someone had started unplugging the smoke alarms. I didn't call anyone. I didn't warn the board. I just watched and waited. Because the thing about control, the real kind, the lasting kind, is it doesn't yell. It doesn't beg. It signs, seals, and waits for someone else to realize they never read the footnotes. I started hearing the cracks before I saw them. First, it was a voicemail from Linda in internal audit. Her voice hushed like someone might be listening. "I know you're not here anymore," she said, "but is it normal for accounts receivable to be pulling historicals from backup instead of live systems?" She didn't leave a callback number. I didn't call back. I just filed the message into a folder I'd already started keeping on my desktop. I titled it Dust Storm, because that's what it felt like someone was kicking up dirt so no one could see what was breaking underneath. Then came the article. A tiny, unnoticed line buried in a niche finance journal. XYZ Corp. Filing delays Q1 footnotes due to data integrity conflicts. I nearly choked on my coffee. Data integrity conflicts? That was code for, "We don't know where our money is." The same company that used to have 3 internal redundancies for every transactional flag was now telling investors their numbers were fuzzy. 2 days later, I got a midnight email from Eric, who'd survived the last round of restructuring. Subject line: "You were right. No body. No attachments. Just that." I stared at it for a long time, knowing exactly what it meant, and still wishing I didn't. Ethan, in all his crypto bro confidence, was blaming legacy drag. Said the systems were outdated. Said the reconciliation issues were because some dinosaur locked everything behind triple encryption and folder mazes. Which, yes, was me. And for good reason. Because when you're dealing with investor capital, tax shields, deferred revenue, and rolling liability exposure, you don't just name folders, stuff, and hope for the best. But instead of learning the system, he rewrote it, or tried to. He started purging files, full departments archived or erased for simplicity. Long-standing analysts were walked out. The compliance officer, God help her, was reassigned to innovation metrics. That's what they called it, innovation. Because truth now had to pass through Ethan's lens of disruption, and anything that didn't align got streamlined. I saw screenshots. I saw spreadsheet headers I hadn't seen since 2011, ripped out of context, formulas overwritten by hard-coded guesses, no audit trail. Someone even tried to simplify our net revenue tracking model by removing the trailing calculation columns that balanced the entire structure. Gone. Just deleted like a typo. My phone buzzed constantly for weeks. Messages from old colleagues, some I hadn't spoken to in years. "Have you seen the Q2 pre-filings? They're off by almost 200K. He replaced Susan with some 23-year-old from his startup days. She doesn't even know what ASC 606 is. Legal just asked me to explain the old voting procedures. What's going on? I answered none of them. I wasn't ready. Because here's the thing about rot. It spreads quietly, then all at once. And Ethan's rot wasn't just arrogance. It was ignorance on fire. He believed if something wasn't fast, it was useless. If it wasn't new, it was broken. And if it couldn't be explained in a tweet, it was a waste of oxygen. But numbers don't care about style. Balance sheets don't flinch for charisma. And liability doesn't give a damn about your charisma deck. The more he pushed, the worse it got. He tried forcing system overhauls mid-quarter, introduced an unvetted SaaS platform to run cost centers, and even approved a vendor contract that hadn't passed a single internal check, because the guy pitched well. Within a month, internal reporting lagged by 3 weeks, revenue forecasts became guesswork, and the audit log stopped matching transactional flow. And me? I watched. From my living room, with a decaf coffee and a 24-inch monitor, I watched the empire I built start coughing blood. Not with rage, with certainty, because I knew what was coming, and I knew where the claws lived. It started with a calendar ping, a recurring quarterly audit meeting, same as always. Only this one had an emergency tag attached. That's the kind of quiet panic corporate boards disguise as routine. They don't say, "We're screwed." They say, "Q3 clarity session." They don't scream. They reschedule lunches. I got the call at 7:42 a.m. on a Tuesday. Unknown number. Cleveland area code. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hi, this is Denise Rayner from Internal Compliance," the voice said, young, nervous, like someone still wearing the lanyard from orientation. "Sorry for reaching out so early. I found something." She stumbled through it, said she was preparing backup documentation for the audit committee, found an unfamiliar clause in the leadership transition amendment. Her voice cracked when she said my name was explicitly referenced in a fiduciary capacity. "I think it's real," she whispered. "Legal's reviewing it, but it has your signature and his." I didn't flinch. "You want me to clarify it?" "Yes, if that's okay." I paused. "Happy to explain," I said. "In person." Legal followed up within the hour. A polite, corporate little email with too many recipients in the BCC field. The subject line was Clause 7C Review, Former Officer Input Requested. No one used the word mistake. No one used the word panic. But every sentence reeked of it. I put on my old charcoal blazer, no makeup, no rings, just my wedding band and a clean white shirt. The drive downtown was smooth, traffic oddly polite. It had been 3 months. Not long, but it felt like a different life. I parked in the visitor lot. No reserved space anymore. Didn't bother me. When I walked in through the lobby, no one recognized me. That was the goal. At 11 sharp, I pushed open the boardroom door. 12 heads turned. There they were, directors, legal, Ethan, and that poor compliance girl, Denise, clutching a manila folder like it was Kevlar. I took the open seat across from Ethan. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Thanks for coming," he said, like this was just another routine sit-down over bad coffee and HR platitudes. I gave him the same look I used to give interns who asked if rounding up was okay on payroll. Then I opened my folder. It had 1 page inside, clean, laminated, signed. "Clause 7C, I said, sliding it gently across the table. "Fiduciary oversight and voting proxy transfer during periods of unplanned operational uncertainty." Ethan's brow furrowed. That's exactly what you signed," I interrupted. "March 14th, right here." I tapped the line where his name sat, black ink on legal parchment, right above mine. Notarized. Witnessed. Filed. The room went to still. Legal leaned forward, scanning it like it might bite. "This appears binding," one of them murmured. The chairman, a man who once called me the human firewall, cleared his throat. "Can you confirm the clause was inserted in good faith?" "Yes," I said simply. It was reviewed and included at the request of the outgoing controller, me. It was also sent to legal and CC'd to the board secretary the same day. Time-stamped and archived. Ethan shifted. "We fast-tracked the doc," he said. "There was a deadline. There was a signature," I said. "Yours. On a binding clause you never read." Silence. Real silence, not tension, not confusion, recognition. In that moment, the entire table turned toward me, not in awe, in accountability. The clause transferred temporary control, not just over finances, but over internal voting rights tied to oversight until the next verified audit. That meant, starting now, I had the final say on all fiduciary decisions until the review was complete. Ethan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I leaned back in my chair, not triumphant, not smug, just steady. "I'll need the current reconciliation logs," I said, unedited. No one moved, so I said it again. "I'll need them by 3. Then I folded my hands and waited. By 2:57 p.m., they were all in the room again. Legal, compliance, the audit committee, 3 board members dialing in from London, and Ethan, who looked like he hadn't slept since the clause surfaced. His jaw was tight, the collar of his overpriced dress shirt open just enough to suggest desperation disguised as confidence. I sat exactly where I had that morning. Folder closed, laptop off, just a printed agenda and a post-it note with 2 words. Clause 7C. I didn't need anything else. At 3:01 p.m., the audit chair cleared her throat. Let's begin with the clause in question. Legal projected it onto the screen, just 1 paragraph, half a page, signed and sealed in ink. In the event of significant control shifts, voting authority and fiduciary access shall temporarily transfer to the outgoing controller for oversight until formal audit clearance is achieved. The room was dead quiet. You could hear the HVAC hum. Ethan leaned forward. This was theoretical, right? He looked to legal. I mean, this kind of clause is rarely activated. It's legally binding, the general counsel said flatly, and unfortunately, not theoretical if the triggers match. They don't match, Ethan snapped. Let's walk through that, I said, gently opening the folder I'd brought back with me. In the last 8 weeks alone, 4 policy reversals on financial controls without board approval, 2 quarters of reconciliation discrepancies, 1 unauthorized software migration mid-cycle, and 0 oversight on a 7-figure vendor payout that bypassed compliance. I slid the documents across the table one by one. These aren't hypotheticals. These are logged events. Each constitutes a significant control shift under the amendment's definition. Ethan turned to legal again, voice climbing. There's no way this holds. She doesn't work here anymore. That's irrelevant, legal replied. The clause was constructed to extend temporary authority after her exit. It's a continuity safeguard, meant exactly for this type of disruption. The chairman rubbed his temples. So you're telling me she now oversees the CFO? Temporarily, I said, folding my hands. Until the audit is complete and the controls are verified intact. A long pause followed. You could feel everyone doing the same mental math. Ethan's eyes darted around the room, looking for someone to speak. No one did. Come on, he said, laughing nervously. We're not really handing her the keys based on some dusty clause, are we? No one laughed. Legal spoke again, slower this time. Per the signed amendment, until the next official clearance is granted, she has full proxy authority over all fiduciary operations and internal voting matters related to financial governance. Ethan's face drained of color. The audit chair turned to me. Miss Bell, do you intend to invoke the clause in full? I didn't blink. Yes, effective immediately. Someone exhaled sharply. A paper rustled. Ethan opened his mouth again, but it hung there, jaw slack, eyes wide. He finally whispered, You're not serious. I looked at him. I warned you the fine print wasn't irrelevant. Then I turned to the board. Shall we proceed with the findings? No one said a word, but every single person in that room was looking at me differently now. By 3:27 p.m. I had the authority, not symbolic, not ceremonial. Legal had confirmed it in writing, and the board hadn't raised a single objection. Ethan sat frozen, mouth slightly open, eyes unfocused, like someone waiting for a lifeguard while the tide kept rising. But no one was jumping in after him. I pulled out a second folder from my bag, this one thicker. Not flashy. No cover. Just old-school dividers and a metal fastener. I opened it slowly, deliberately, like a priest unveiling scripture, and placed the first page on the center of the table. Effective immediately, I began. I'm initiating a temporary financial operations freeze. No disbursements over $25,000 without dual sign-off. No vendor contracts executed without audit team review. All account access logs will be preserved and isolated for compliance. Ethan jolted like someone had goosed him with a live wire. You can't just... I can, I said flatly, and I am. Next page. This is a communication Ethan sent to compliance on May 18th, instructing them to relax sign-off friction for vendor accounts flagged in Q1. Slide. Here's a payment issued to a third-party firm, Synergate Group LLC, for $940,000, approved solely by Ethan, with no contract review on file. Slide. This is an internal memo dated June 4th, where an employee raised concerns about the erasure of archive folders containing reconciliation documentation. No follow-up, no response. Slide. This is an email Ethan sent to the audit subcommittee chair instructing them to postpone review until the next fiscal cycle, citing operational bandwidth. By the fifth slide, Ethan was visibly sweating. His jaw tightened and released in twitchy bursts, like he was chewing through drywall. One of the investor reps on Zoom unmuted her mic. Is there documentation to support these events? I looked at the camera. All verified, backed up, time-stamped, digital and paper trail, originals filed in the locked archive, the ones still secured under my access credentials. The chairman nodded slowly. These are serious lapses. They're more than lapses, I said. They're misrepresentations, negligence, at minimum. Ethan pushed his chair back. This is political, he muttered. She's bitter. This is vendetta theater. If this were a vendetta, I said, looking him dead in the eye, I would have let you burn the place to the ground and collected the insurance on my legacy. But I didn't. I protected it. Quietly, thoroughly, and legally. There was a silence, not the awkward kind, the kind that follows an impact, like dust settling after a demolition charge. Investor rep number 2 leaned into the table. Until this is resolved, I recommend the CFO step aside, temporarily. I second, another voice chimed in. The board chair turned to Ethan. You should take leave, effective today. Ethan scoffed, stood up, tried to gather the scattered papers, but they slipped from his grasp. He stood there for a beat too long, fists clenched, before storming out. No one followed him. I didn't smile. I didn't exhale. I just adjusted the stack of documents in front of me. This isn't personal, I said quietly, but the financial integrity of this company is, and right now, it's bleeding from a dozen avoidable wounds. I handed out the rest of the binder, split evenly among the attendees. We begin triage tomorrow. Not one person disagreed. Not one person asked how I'd pulled it off. They just nodded, like they finally understood why the footnotes mattered. By the end of that week, Ethan's nameplate was gone. Not stolen, not defaced, just removed, like he'd never been there at all. The company issued a brief internal memo, 3 dry paragraphs about a temporary leadership realignment in response to procedural inconsistencies. No one believed it. Everyone read between the lines. You could feel the tension shift in the air, like a weather front after lightning. By Monday, Bloomberg was asking questions. Reuters followed. Unnamed sources leaked just enough to stir blood in the water. Unexplained vendor payouts, delayed filings, a compliance clause triggered by former leadership. No one used the word suspended, but his LinkedIn status changed to exploring new opportunities. before the week was out, the board called me back in that Wednesday, not to apologize, not to explain. They were too corporate for that. They just asked, over still water and recycled air, if I'd consider overseeing an interim restructuring of financial operations. Not CFO, not even controller. Just architect, consultant, steward. Whatever word made them feel like they weren't begging. I told them no. I wasn't coming back. I didn't want the office. I didn't want the meetings or the title or the name on a door. What I wanted, what I'd always wanted, was order, stability, systems that worked even when people didn't. So I gave them something else, a protocol. 3 binders, color-coded, each one containing a step-by-step action plan for restoring compliance, reversing damage, isolating risk, and rebuilding trust. Nothing flashy, nothing ego-driven, just clean, hard architecture for people who'd forgotten what stability actually felt like. This doesn't fix the culture, I said before sliding the binders across the table. But it stops the bleeding. The chairman nodded solemnly. We can implement this starting Friday. Thursday, I corrected. The wounds are fresh. You'll want time to cauterize. As I stood, someone handed me a pen, a silver click top with a ridiculous hexagon grip, Ethan's favorite, the same one he used to sign off on his legacy-free vision. I clicked it once, signed the last page of the protocol with calm, even strokes. No flourish. Just my name, like always, neat, consistent, unreadable to people who didn't understand what it had cost. Then I left the pen on the table. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like a reset. Outside, the air smelled like rain. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled. I didn't rush to beat it. I just walked, steady pace, head up. The company would recover, maybe even evolve. But now they'd do it with eyes open. Because somewhere in their chaos, they'd been reminded what the quiet ones are capable of when pushed too far. I didn't need credit, but I got peace. And peace, when you've built your life brick by brick, balance by balance, is worth more than any title they forgot to offer. The boardroom looked exactly the same. Too much glass, too little warmth, chairs that cost more than most people's mortgages, and still managed to be uncomfortable. The same skyline view, the same overwatered ficus in the corner, but the energy? Different, sharpened. Like everyone in that room had finally realized the walls weren't just glass. They were see-through. They were all waiting when I walked in. No one spoke. A few nodded. One person had the decency to stand, but no one offered a seat. I didn't want one. I walked to the head of the table, the same spot where Ethan used to lean back like a TED Talk was about to burst from his mouth. I pulled a single sheet of paper from my folder, thick bond stock, laser printed, signed in ink that would outlast all of us, and placed it flat in front of the chairman. Clause 7C, still laminated, still binding. This was the clause you missed, I said. The one you called irrelevant, the one he never read, the one that saved you. No one argued. I looked around the table, faces that once barely registered mine in elevators, now watching like jurors in a murder trial. Meeting adjourned. I didn't wait for questions. I didn't offer clarification. I turned and walked out, the echo of my heels the only sound in the room. No cameras, no statement, no handshakes. They tried to stop me in the hallway, someone from PR, maybe legal, but I just raised a hand and kept walking. Let them draft their sanitized memos. Let them spin the narrative however they liked. I didn't need to control the story. I'd already written the footnotes. Outside, the sun broke through a thick bank of clouds like a slow verdict. I didn't smile, but I felt it. That internal click. Not revenge, precision. The final number balancing the ledger. Later that month, the company released a revised internal policy. No document would move forward without full clause review by legal and the board. Mandatory briefings, multiple sign-offs, redundant oversight restored. Some called it overkill. Those who knew better called it insurance. And behind closed doors, in hushed tones across departments, they started referring to Clause 7C by a new name. The Bell Rule. I never went back, never needed to. But from that day forward, no one in that building ever skimmed the fine print again. Never underestimate the person who writes the footnotes. Subscribe for more stories where silence speaks loudest and the paperclip holds the grenade pin.